The moment she stepped onto the plane, everyone thought they knew who she was. A sleek, powerful woman in a sharply tailored black suit, designer heels that clicked against the cabin floor, and eyes that could cut through steel. To most, she was just another passenger, a CEO boarding a commercial flight. But anyone who dared underestimate her was about to regret it. "Excuse me, ma'am," a uniformed airline employee said, not stopping her just as she was about to take her seat. "We need you to come with us." Her brow arched. "Come with you? For what?" "Security." She looked around. No cameras, no glaring lights, just the calm, almost indifferent faces of passengers who hadn't yet realized their flight was about to turn into a storm. "Security?" she echoed, her voice steady but carrying an edge. "Am I being detained?" The employee hesitated, and that hesitation was enough to ignite the first spark of fury in her. She'd faced boardroom betrayals, sabotage, smear campaigns. She had dealt with investors who thought they could play her, competitors who tried to undercut her, even media outlets that tried to twist her every word. But she had never been humiliated in public. Not like this, out in front of strangers. The security guard stepped forward, his hand brushing her arm in a gesture meant to assert authority. "Ma'am, please cooperate. We just need you to step." Off the plane, her eyes, dark and unwavering, locked on his. "Step off," she repeated slowly. "Or are you trying to embarrass me in front of everyone?" The passengers were starting to stir. A man in the aisle seat whispered to his wife. Mother clutched her child, sensing the tension but unsure why. The cabin crew hovered, nervous, unsure how to enforce what seemed like an absurd order. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just stared, letting the silence stretch, letting the humiliation hang in the air like a thick fog. Finally, the guard spoke again, more insistently. "Ma'am, I need you to step off the plane now, or I'll have to call for backup." Backup. That word meant to intimidate had the opposite effect. She smiled, not a pleasant smile, but the kind that made it clear she was about to retaliate in ways they hadn't imagined. "Back up," she said. "By all means, call whoever you need. But while you're at it, maybe call your manager too." He frowned. "Manager? The CEO?" she said, her voice now icy. "Because I am a CEO too, you see, right now. Your airline owes me, and I don't mean a polite apology." Passengers started pulling out phones, some trying to record what was unfolding. The guard looked uncomfortable, and the airline employee who had first stopped her shifted nervously. Something was off. No one had expected her to respond like this. Most people would have complied. Some would have begged. But she was a storm contained in a woman's frame. Storms didn't negotiate, they destroyed. "Ma'am, I really need you to," the guard started, but she cut him off. "You really need me to what?" she asked, leaning slightly closer. Her presence filled the aisle. "'Cause if your goal is to humiliate me, let me save you the trouble. You've already started losing, but I can still make it worse. And trust me, I will." Guard froze. There was a pause. A quiet, trembling pause that felt like the seconds before a jerk. Then she reached into her briefcase. Calmly, slowly, her fingers found a folder, thick with documents, charts, and contracts that represented millions of dollars. Contracts that could make or break companies. Contracts that could destroy reputations. She didn't wave them in the air. She didn't shout. She just held them tightly. A subtle signal that she was not powerless. She was about to remind them who they were dealing with. $3 million, she said. Her voice low but carrying across the cabin, catching everyone's attention. "That's how much your airline has just lost in funding today." And it's not. Even the tip of the iceberg. The murmurs grew louder. Passengers were leaning forward, craning their necks to see the confrontation. Crew members exchanged worried glances. The guard's confidence was crumbling. "How? How is that possible?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his tone. "It's simple," she replied, her tone almost conversational now. Like she was explaining a math problem to a child. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. I don't do business with companies that humiliate me. You can call it arrogance. You can call it power. Call it what you want. I call it consequences. And right now, your airline is facing them. The employee who had first stopped her looked like he wanted to disappear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had no plan, no strategy, no defense. She walked past them, slowly, deliberately, back down the aisle. Each step was calculated, measured, an assertion of dominance. She could feel the energy in the cabin shift. People were no longer watching her, they were watching them. The airline's staff. The men who had thought they could assert control. The ones who had made the mistake of underestimating her. By the time she reached the exit, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a force. And with one sharp gesture, one silent command of presence, she turned humiliation into leverage. The head of security finally realized what was happening too late. "Ma'am," he started, but she didn't wait. She turned, smiled that same icy smile, and said, "Enjoy the consequences." And with that, she stepped off the plane. The reaction was immediate. Phones were recording, passengers were talking, and somewhere corporate offices were ringing. Investors, partners, and airline executives would soon learn the full cost of that one miscalculated attempt at authority. Within hours, the airline's executive team had received her message. A formal letter, concise and uncompromising, outlining the immediate withdrawal of $3 million in funding. It's contingent on a personal apology and a restructuring of the company's internal policies. Regarding treatment of high-level passengers particularly, women of color, they called her. They begged, they offered, they attempted to negotiate. She listened politely, nodded once or twice, and then responded with words that would haunt their meetings for months. No, it was that simple. One word, a finality that carried more weight than their entire boardroom combined. And so, what began as a simple flight, just another business trip, turned into a story that would ripple across the airline industry. Media and corporate boardrooms. One woman, one confrontation, one silent gesture, had rewritten the rules. Some passengers would remember her for the elegance, others for the sheer audacity. But the airline would remember her for the millions they lost, the lesson they never saw coming. You never, ever underestimate a black CEO who knows her worth. The plane sat on the tarmac, engines humming softly, oblivious to the storm that had already passed over it. The passengers disembarked slowly, still whispering, still buzzing from the intensity of what had just occurred. And somewhere in that crowd, the woman in black disappeared into the city. Calm, composed, victorious, she wasn't just a CEO. She was a reminder that power isn't just about title or money. It's about presence, awareness, and the refusal to be diminished. And for anyone foolish enough to think otherwise, the warning was clear. Never ever pull a black CEO off her flight by the next morning. The story had erupted across every news platform, every social media feed, every business chat. The headline was everywhere. Security pulled black CEO off plane, then she yanked. At $3 million in funding from the airline? People couldn't stop talking about it. The video from the plane had gone viral almost instantly, capturing every sharp glance, every measured step, every word that had sent airline executives into panic. At her private office, she poured herself a cup of coffee, watching the analytics roll in. Every view, every share, every comment told her one thing: she had won the first round. But victory, she knew, was never just in the immediate triumph. It was in the long game, in control, in ensuring that this incident became more than a headline. It became a lesson. Her assistant, a young man who had been with her since the early days of her startup, hesitated at the doorway. "Ma'am, the board is on line 1. They want to talk to you about the airline incident." Ow! She didn't look up. Put them through. The boardroom filled with voices, some tense, others incredulous. They had seen the video, heard the reports, and were struggling to reconcile the calm, composed demeanor of the woman on the screen with the chaos the airline had experienced. "First," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "let me make one thing clear. I did not create this situation for spectacle. I acted because I was forced into a corner, and I will not apologize for acting in my own defense. Not for anyone." Silence. Even the most seasoned executives couldn't interrupt. They had learned long ago that when she spoke, she didn't just speak. She dictated the room's energy. One of them finally found words. But the airline $3 million. That's unprecedented. This will have ramifications for all our partnerships. Our reputation, her hand raised, stopping him mid-sentence. Unprecedented? Maybe necessary? Absolutely. Let me be very clear. That money wasn't just funding. It was leverage. A tool. And it was withdrawn not out of spite, but out of principle. If a company underestimates a black CEO, if they believe they can humiliate me and my accomplishments, then they have already lost before I even touch them. The world needs to understand that consequences exist. The boardroom remained silent. She sipped her coffee, letting her words sink in. Even she felt a flicker of satisfaction at the visible tension she created. But there was no time to linger in triumph. Next steps had to be calculated, precise, unrelenting. Across the city, the airline executives were in full crisis mode. Phones were ringing off the hook. Shareholders demanded explanations. PR teams scrambled to draft statements, none of which felt adequate. They had underestimated her. That was the consensus. It was killing them. One junior executive, barely into his third year, suggested a public apology. Maybe we just apologize? Make a statement that we respect all passengers. The CEO of the airline, a man who prided himself on control, looked at him as though he had lost his mind. Apologize? After we were right? Right? The junior executive echoed. They've pulled a $3 million funding request. They have social media videos. Every passenger saw it. We're not right. We're embarrassed. But if we don't fix this quickly, we're going to lose investors, contracts, credibility, everything. The airline CEO clenched his jaw. He'd faced crises before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could cut this deep. And nothing that had come from underestimating a single person. Meanwhile, she wasn't idle. She had already scheduled meetings with key investors, partners, and media contacts. She wanted the story to spread, yes, but on her terms. She wanted her narrative to dominate, to control perception, to transform humiliation into empowerment, not just for herself, but as a signal to every woman, every professional of color, that there was power in refusing to be diminished. Her assistant reminded her. Ma'am, your social media accounts are blowing up. Everyone's talking about the incident. Some are supportive, some not so much. She smiled faintly. Good. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them debate. Let them fear. That energy works in my favor. But remember this, we don't just react to chaos. We control it. We channel it. Every move from here has purpose. By late afternoon, the ripple effects reached far beyond the airline industry. News networks invited her to speak, but she declined politely. Interviews, she knew, often twisted nuance. Instead, she let the videos do the talking. Let the world see how a CEO could respond to blatant disrespect with calm. Measured authority and measurable consequences. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from one of her closest mentors, a retired executive who had seen decades of boardroom battles. I saw what happened, he said. I have to admit. I've never seen anyone do that with such precision. She leaned back, letting the weight of his words sink in. Precision, she echoed. It's all about precision. Timing, placement, leverage, and awareness. Know your worth and the world will eventually follow. That's all it takes. Even as she spoke, her mind was moving ahead. The airline incident was just the beginning. She knew the fallout would involve lawyers, PR strategies, investor negotiations, and, inevitably, attempts to challenge her authority. But she welcomed the challenge. She thrived on it. Every attempt to undermine her, every slight or insult, came fuel for action. Late that night, as the city lights shimmered beneath her office window, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the early days, the small office with barely enough chairs, the investors who doubted her, the competitors who tried to sabotage her progress. Every struggle, every obstacle, had built her into someone who didn't just survive adversity, she wielded it like a weapon. And now, The airline incident wasn't just a victory for herself. It was a statement, a declaration that power, when combined with intelligence, courage, and unshakable self-worth, could not be ignored by mourning. The story had evolved into a full-blown case study in leadership circles. Articles dissected her actions, praising her composure and strategic brilliance. Some criticized her, but even critics could not deny the clarity of her actions. She had turned humiliation into leverage, tension into advantage, and a single confrontation into a movement that challenged conventional power dynamics. The airline, meanwhile, was scrambling to save face. They issued statements, scheduled emergency meetings, and even considered restructuring their executive team to prevent future incidents. But internally, everyone knew the truth. They had underestimated a black CEO, and the cost was monumental. And somewhere in the calm of her office, she prepared for the next move. Because if there was one thing she had learned in her life, it was that victory was not just in the moment, it was in foresight, strategy, and relentless execution. One incident on a plane had sparked chaos, but chaos was her playground. Would ride it, shape it, and ultimately use it to solidify her influence in ways no one could predict. The world had witnessed her power. But this was just the beginning. The morning after the airline incident, she sat in her office, reviewing emails, texts, and messages that poured in from every corner of the business world. Some were congratulations, others offers of support. But a few carried veiled threats and thinly disguised warnings. She read each one carefully, noting patterns, connections, and opportunities. Every message was data, and every data point could be leveraged. She thought back to the early days, before she ever carried the weight of millions in funding or signed multi-million-dollar contracts. She remembered the cramped office space, the flickering fluorescent lights, the investors who shook their heads at every pitch, convinced that her vision was too ambitious. At the time, she had smiled, nodded politely, and walked away, because she had learned an important lesson. Patience, observation, and timing were everything. The world would not hand her respect. She had to command it. Her mentor's voice echoed. In her mind, power isn't given. Power is earned, and when necessary, enforced. She had learned to enforce it with precision, and today, the airline incident was a perfect example. Her phone buzzed again, this time from a major investor, who had been closely aligned with her projects for years. The tone was cautious, almost apologetic. We saw what happened. We understand why you withdrew funding. We're concerned about potential backlash. Can we discuss next steps? She smiled slightly, setting her coffee aside. Of course, she replied, her tone calm but commanding. Let's discuss steps, but understand this. The world will react to power in different ways. Some will support you, some will resist. My role is not to soothe resistance, it is to define consequences. Are we clear? There was a pause on the line, then a quiet, crystal clear. After the call ended, she opened her laptop and reviewed the airline contracts she had in her possession. Every clause, every line, every loophole was a potential tool. She had always believed that knowledge was power, but applied knowledge was unstoppable, and she intended to apply hers fully. Her assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you." A reporter from one of the top business magazines. She raised an eyebrow. "Send them in." The reporter entered, notebook in hand, and immediately began asking questions about the incident. "Ms. Carter," she said, using the CEO's surname, "how did you decide to withdraw $3 million in funding so swiftly? Was this planned or a reaction?" She leaned back in her chair, studying the reporter as if she were evaluating a contract. "Neither," she said finally. "Because nothing ever is when someone underestimates you. It wasn't reactionary because every action I take is measured, strategic, and deliberate. When someone attempts to humiliate me, I don't react or respond. There's a difference, and it's critical to understand that distinction if you want to survive in any leadership position." The reporter scribbled furiously, nodding. "Some are saying this sets a dangerous precedent, that no one can challenge your authority without facing massive financial consequences." She smiled, a small, controlled smile that carried weight. It's dangerous, perhaps, but necessary? Absolutely. We live in a world where authority is often misused and respect is demanded but rarely given. If a lesson must be taught, I prefer it to be clear, unambiguous, and unforgettable. Later that day, she received another call, this one from the airline itself. The CEO on the other end sounded strained, almost pleading. Ms. Carter, we'd like to discuss reinstating funding. Perhaps there's a compromise we can reach? She paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Reinstating funding? She said slowly. Do you understand that this isn't just about money? It's about accountability, integrity, and respect. If those principles are violated again, the consequences will not be negotiable. Understand? Yes, we understand his stam, faintly, just enough to let them know she had already won. Then let's proceed carefully. I will have my team draft terms that reflect these principles. As the airline scrambled to regain control of the situation, she began planning her next moves. She had always believed in staying 3 steps ahead, and this was no exception. The incident had given her leverage, credibility, and a platform. Now she intended to solidify her position, expand her influence, and ensure that any attempt to challenge her authority would be met with the same decisive consequences. Her mind drifted again to the past. The nights she had stayed in the office. Long after everyone left, the countless rejections, the times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or ignored. Each moment had taught her a lesson. Never rely on anyone else to define your worth. The only person who could enforce respect was her. She had done exactly that on a plane full of strangers. In front of the world, by evening, she was already drafting her next strategy. Meetings were scheduled with investors, potential partners, and industry leaders. Each interaction would be an opportunity to reinforce her authority, demonstrate her competence, turn the airline incident into a case study of power, control, and respect. She looked out over the city skyline, lights twinkling like distant stars. The world would try to challenge her, to diminish her, to test her limits. But she had proven one undeniable truth. Underestimating her was a mistake that came with consequences: financial, reputational, and strategic. As night fell, she finally leaned back in her chair, letting herself breathe. Victory was never simple, and it was never final, but tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The storm had passed, and she had emerged unshaken, unbowed, and more powerful than ever. Tomorrow, she would rise again, ready to transform the incident into a catalyst for influence, strategy, and long-term success. Because this was more than just a confrontation, it was a lesson in authority, resilience, and the power of refusing to be underestimated, and she intended to make sure the world never forgot it. The morning air in the city was thick with anticipation, though only a few knew why. Word of the airline incident had spread far beyond social media and news outlets that had seeped into boardrooms, executive suites, and investment circles. Whispers of disbelief and fear circulated like wildfire, Single CEO, unshaken, had withdrawn $3 million from an airline for a slight. And she hadn't even broken a sweat, but power attracts attention, good and bad. By the time she arrived at her office, her team was already in crisis mode, not theirs, others. Several emails had come in from competitors, some overt, some veiled threats cloaked in pleasantries. She scanned each one carefully, her eyes narrowing as she deciphered which were empty gestures and which carried real danger. Her assistant, sensing the tension, hesitated at the doorway. "Ma'am, there's a call from someone at Sterling Capital. They're asking to meet immediately." She raised an eyebrow. "Sterling Capital? That's interesting. Patch them through." The voice on the other end was polite but clipped. "Miss Carter, we've been following recent events, your actions regarding the airline. Sterling wants to understand the implications for your other investments. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential collaboration or, if necessary, mitigation strategies." She smiled faintly. "Mitigation strategies?" she echoed. "I'm not sure the world needs mitigation. It needs clarity, strategy, and respect, but I'm willing to speak. Send a schedule. I'll make time." Hanging up, she turned to her assistant. "This is exactly why I never underestimate attention, whether positive or negative. Every move I make has a ripple effect. I don't respond impulsively, I act with intention. Make a note. Prepare the Sterling Capital brief. Full dossier, including projections, contracts, and influence map. I want clarity before we meet." As her team scrambled to assemble the materials, she allowed herself a quiet moment, reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. There had been nights when she had nothing but her laptop and a cup of cold coffee, long after the office lights had been turned off. Nights when investors had laughed at her pitches, competitors had tried to steal her ideas, and colleagues had doubted her abilities. She remembered the sting of rejection, the weight of being underestimated, the endless obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, and yet each obstacle had sharpened her. Every dismissal, every slight, every sneer had been fuel. It had trained her, hardened her, and taught her one indispensable lesson. Power is not inherited. It is seized, honed, and executed. The Sterling Capital meeting arrived in the early afternoon. She entered the conference room with the same calm authority she had displayed on the plane. Her posture impeccable, her presence commanding. Several executives rose to greet her, but none dared challenge her. They had already seen the viral video. They had witnessed her precision, her composure, the undeniable force of her will. "Ms. Carter," the lead executive began, "thank you for meeting with us. Sterling Capital is impressed by your decisiveness, but some are concerned that your recent actions could unsettle partners and markets. We want to understand the rationale and ensure that potential risks are managed." She listened patiently, her hands folded, eyes steady. "You are correct that my actions have consequences," she said finally, "but the question is not whether I can act decisively. It is whether your partners can respect authority, competence, and principle. My decision to withdraw $3 million from the airline was not impulsive, nor was it punitive for entertainment. It was a statement. Respect is non-negotiable. Anything else is irrelevant." A murmur ran through the room. The executives exchanged glances, clearly weighing their next words. One finally spoke. "We understand. But some argue that this sets a precedent. If partners fear repercussions for minor infractions, they may hesitate to engage fully with you." She tilted her head, considering the point, though she had already anticipated it. "Then let me clarify. There is a difference between minor missteps and deliberate attempts to undermine or humiliate me. The world responds differently to each. Minor mistakes are managed through communication, negotiation, and clarity. Deliberate disrespect requires consequences. That distinction must be understood by all partners, all investors, and all colleagues. Once it is clear, hesitation disappears, replaced by respect and focus." By the time the meeting ended, Sterling Capital executives were visibly impressed, some even slightly intimidated. She had not just defended her actions, she had reframed the narrative, establishing herself as both principled and unyielding. It's an executive who would not compromise her dignity or leverage. Yet even as victories accumulated, shadows loomed. That afternoon, her assistant handed her a discreet envelope with no return address. Inside was a single note. "You've made waves, but some tides fight back. Watch carefully." She frowned slightly, placing the note on her desk. Threats were not new to her, but the timing was noteworthy. Someone was testing boundaries, measuring her reaction. That was exactly the kind of information she needed. Observing intent before acting was a hallmark of her strategy. Patience, not impulse, always won. Late that evening, she reflected once more on her ascent. Every challenge, every underestimation had been a lesson in resilience, focus, and anticipation. The airline incident was not an anomaly. It was the culmination of decades of preparation, training, and understanding human behavior. She had learned to read intent, project authority, and act decisively. The world may have tried to humiliate her, but she had transformed humiliation into leverage, confusion into advantage, and fear into respect. And now, new adversaries were circling. Some were subtle, some overt, but all would be forced to reckon. With her precision, she had no illusions about the battles ahead, but she welcomed them. For in every challenge lay opportunity, in every opportunity lay power. By midnight, her strategy was clear: monitor adversaries, solidify alliances, communicate her principles to partners, and continue transforming every challenge into leverage. She was not just surviving the storm, she was shaping it, bending it to her will, and ensuring that those who underestimated her would learn definitively the consequences of misjudgment. Tomorrow, she would rise again, ready to confront both opportunity and opposition with the same calm, unyielding authority that had already rewritten the rules of engagement. She was a CEO, a strategist, and a force the world could no longer ignore. And she intended to make sure everyone, investors, competitors, and airlines alike, remembered exactly why the morning light cut through the blinds of her office, casting sharp lines across the polished floor. The city outside pulsed with activity, oblivious to the storm she had already stirred and the battles yet to come. By now, the airline incident had evolved into a case study in power dynamics, with analysts debating every move she had made. But she wasn't interested in debates. She was interested in outcomes. Her assistant knocked softly. "Ma'am, there's someone here you might want to see." A representative from Hawthorne Group. She raised an eyebrow. Hawthorne. The investment firm was known for its aggressive tactics, a group that thrived on leverage and intimidation. If they were coming to see her, it meant someone was already plotting. She needed to be prepared. "Send them in," she said, calm, measured. The representative entered, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, his posture confident, eyes calculating. He smiled politely, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Miss Carter, we've been following recent events. Your decisive action against the airline was bold, to say the least. But we're concerned about ripple effects. Investors. Partners, they want reassurance that your future moves won't destabilize agreements." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp, unblinking.
"How ripple effects
"Are part of consequence. If you or anyone else cannot respect the parameters of partnership, the ripple becomes a wave. I don't destabilize arbitrarily. One enforce. Respect. That is a principle, not a risk." The man's smile tightened. He'd come to intimidate, but she had already deflected the subtle threat. "Principle," he echoed. "Yes, but some may argue that withdrawing $3 million from a partner could be perceived as extreme." She tilted her head. "Perception is malleable. Reality is absolute. My actions were extreme only to those who misjudged the situation. To those who understand leverage, timing, and strategy, they were necessary. Perhaps your firm should take note." There was a pause. Her calm authority was a wall, and he could see that any attempt to challenge her would be met with measured force. Finally, he said, "We'll take that into consideration." And with that, he left, leaving her office untouched, but with a lingering tension that spoke volumes. Her assistant exhaled softly. "That was impressive, ma'am." Smiled faintly, returning to her desk. "Impressive?" But strategy is not measured by impression. It is measured by results. And the result here is clear. We are in control. Later that day, she convened her executive team. Charts, projections, and reports were spread across the table. She walked among them, pointing to key data, highlighting opportunities and vulnerabilities. "We need to anticipate," she said. "Every partner, every competitor, every investor is watching. They will test limits, probe weaknesses, and attempt to manipulate outcomes. We must be prepared, vigilant, and decisive." Her team listened, intently, taking notes, absorbing the weight of her presence. They knew she was not just giving instructions, she was transmitting a mindset, philosophy. Every decision they made from this point forward would be influenced by her approach, control, precision, foresight. By evening, she was reviewing the airline's response to the funding withdrawal. They had sent multiple messages, drafted statements, and even attempted back-channel negotiations. All of it was ineffective. They had misjudged her, and the world had seen it. That mistake would not be forgiven easily. Yet she did not act impulsively. She allowed them to stew in uncertainty, too. Feel the consequences of underestimating her. That was her advantage. Patience, observation, timing, she did not need to strike. Immediately, the ripples of her initial action were already creating waves, shaping the environment in her favor. Her mind wandered briefly to her personal journey. Every challenge, every underestimation she had faced, had prepared her for this moment. The airline incident was not an anomaly. It was a reflection of decades of experience, resilience, and strategic thinking. She had learned early that power was never given. It was seized, leveraged, and defended. And in every confrontation, the stakes were always clear. Respect was non-negotiable. That night, as the city lights glittered like distant stars, she drafted her next moves. Investors would need reassurance, partners would require clarity, and competitors would seek opportunities. Each interaction would be an exercise in influence, each decision a lesson in authority. She would not just navigate the chaos, she would shape it, control it, and convert every challenge into advantage. Somewhere her rivals were plotting, assuming they could manipulate the aftermath of the airline incident. But they had miscalculated. They had not accounted for her foresight, her precision, her unwavering resolve. Every move they made would be anticipated, every attempt to undermine her neutralized, every threat turned into leverage. By the time she finally left the office, she had already outlined the framework for the next phase of her strategy. The world would continue to watch, analyze, and speculate, but she would remain steps ahead, turning chaos into control, adversity into opportunity, and challenge into power. And one thing was certain: anyone foolish enough to underestimate her would soon discover the cost of misjudgment. By mid-morning, the city was buzzing with discussions about her. Boardrooms, coffee shops, even the trading floor were alive with whispers. The CEO who had pulled $3 million in funding from a major airline with a single gesture. Who was she, and what could she do next? Inside her office, she observed it all with calm calculation. She had long since learned that perception was a tool, one that could be molded and directed to serve advantage. Her assistants briefed her on investor inquiries, media calls, and partner communications, each one carefully logged, analyzed, and prioritized. "Ma'am," one assistant said, "Sterling Capital has requested a follow-up. They want to ensure that other partners understand your strategy before making decisions. They're concerned about market reactions." She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Market reactions are temporary. Influence is lasting. Prepare. A comprehensive brief for Sterling. Include projections, contingencies, and leverage points. I want them to see not only what has happened, but what can happen if boundaries are respected or ignored. As the team set to work, her thoughts drifted to the airline executives. They had attempted to assert authority, to humiliate her, and now they were scrambling, unsure how to regain control. Their anxiety was a gift. Every misstep, every hesitation, every internal debate strengthened her position. She did not need to act recklessly. She needed only to maintain clarity, visibility, and presence. By afternoon, her phone rang again. This time, a prominent media outlet requested an exclusive interview. Most CEOs would see this as an opportunity. She saw it as a stage, a chance to reinforce her narrative while demonstrating composure, authority, and strategy. She agreed, setting the time for early evening. In preparation, she reviewed the key points she intended to emphasize: accountability, principle, leverage, and foresight. She would not merely recount the airline incident. She would frame it as a lesson in leadership, a demonstration of strategic power, and a case study in consequences. When the interview began, she spoke with a calm authority that commanded attention. Many have asked why I withdrew funding from the airline. The answer is simple: respect is non-negotiable. In business, as in life, principles are more valuable than money. When those principles are violated, consequences follow. That is not arrogance, that is strategy, that is leadership. Her words resonated. Social media exploded once more, shares multiplying exponentially as viewers debated, praised, and dissected her actions. Analysts wrote columns, business schools considered case studies, and executives reevaluated their assumptions about risk, leverage, and authority. But as public attention surged, she remained focused on private matters. Rivals were not idle. Competitors had begun plotting, attempting to exploit perceived vulnerabilities, probing for weaknesses in her empire. Yet each attempt was anticipated, each maneuver countered with subtle precision. Her network of allies, mentors, and trusted advisors allowed her to see far beyond the immediate battlefield. Late that night, she convened a private strategy session with her most trusted confidants. Maps, charts, and dossiers were spread across the table. "We are no longer reacting," she said. "We are shaping the environment. Every move, every interaction, every negotiation must reinforce our position. Visibility is leverage, control is power, and patience is weaponized strategy. Anyone who misjudges us will face consequences not by chance, but by design." Her team nodded, understanding the depth of her vision. They had long admired her ability to anticipate, calculate, and execute with precision. Tonight, that ability would be tested again, as new challenges loomed on the horizon. As she finally retired to her private quarters, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From modest beginnings to the apex of power, she had faced doubt, rejection, and humiliation, and transformed each into opportunity. The airline incident was just the latest in a series of lessons in leverage, foresight, and authority. Tomorrow, she knew, the stakes would rise further. Rivals would act, investors would react, and new opportunities would emerge. But she was ready. She had prepared for every scenario, anticipated every response, and understood that true power lay not in wealth alone, but in presence, strategy, and the ability to turn adversity into advantage. And as the city slept beneath the glow of streetlights, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The storm had passed, but the ripples were still spreading, and she, as always, was at the center, guiding them with unshakable authority.